So sorry for that. Here is the brief overview of what I'll be speaking on. I will briefly talk about the national digital identity systems, which everyone has been talking about since morning. Then I will talk about some of the risk assessment framework, the open challenges in this performing risk assessment framework for the national digital identity systems, and as well as the impact assessment framework we are trying to develop and the impact calculations. So as national digital identity systems are now becoming an important facet of the national development, and any failure, compromise, or misuse of these systems could be costly and damaging to the government and the society. There have already been reported security and privacy incidents in the media involving national digital identity systems. For instance, the South Korea ID systems that meant that the record of 27 million people, about 80% of the populations, had their ID stolen. And also the voters registration database in Philippines containing the personal data, personal details, and fingerprint of 70 million voters, which was compromised in 2016. And the challenges here is we need to develop a deeper understanding of this problem. And to do this, one way of doing this is to perform a risk assessment. And risk assessment is a systematic process that involves identifying, analyzing, and controlling risks. And this involves 3 key steps, which is understanding what can go wrong, what are the likelihood that this will go wrong, and what are the consequences. Although there have been different cyber risk assessment framework, some of which have been developed by international organizations, government, and research institute. However, despite the various IT risk assessment frameworks, the specific attribute or aspect of the national digital identity systems as opposed to IT systems often prevent the straightforward applications of this risk assessment. And we also found that up to now, there have been no risk assessment standard to govern nations in assessing emerging risks before implementing their national digital identity systems and solutions. So although we discovered that although an excellent starting point for securing a cyber systems like the national digital identity systems is to focus on the risks, however, focusing on these risks require considerations of potential risk impact instead of simply identifying all possible risks. And most disagreement on risk assessment and management do not stem from the differences in measurement or methodology, but rather that the questions of what the identified makes to the relevant stakeholders. And despite the fast-growing research on identification system, security and privacy issues, work is still missing on what could be the impact of compromise of these national digital identity systems on the key relevant stakeholders. So the rest of this talk, we focus on the impact assessment framework that we are trying to develop. And one advantage of the impact-oriented risk assessment framework is that the range of impact that can be identified is not driven solely by the knowledge of threats and attacks, which is necessarily incomplete, as no one can be sure that they have a complete knowledge due to dynamic trend landscapes. And also in an environment such as the national digital identity systems, in which the trend landscapes keep changing and novel attack patterns keep emerging, understanding the potential impact of these attacks on the asset in this environment and being able to alleviate this impact will go a long way in helping the risk management activities. So, however, assessing the impact of risks on national digital identity system have many challenges. First of all, there is problem of scarce data. Only a few government or development partners might have rigorously assessed the effect of compromise on national identity systems. Even if assessment do exist, the assumptions and figures behind these estimations are usually not publicly available. Besides, government and identity solutions provider might have incentives to downgrade some of this impact to save their reputations. In addition as well, it is quite challenging to define a uniform risk impact evaluation metrics across sectors and agencies because the design of using identification systems are multi-layered and rarely comparable across nations. And typically, when people talk about quantifying the impact of compromise on national digital identity systems, the focus is always on the technical and technical security and privacy impact of the systems and the data. However, developing a comprehensive risk impact assessment must extend far beyond this requirement and be done with a contextual understanding of the stakeholders, the people, the community, and the environment these systems serve. So to better capture the impact of compromise in this environment, we need to first identify who are the key stakeholders and what are their roles and what do they really value. In the context of national digital identity systems, stakeholders are individuals and organizations that are involved in creating, maintaining, and using these ID systems throughout the identity life cycles. And we identify 5 key stakeholders. And the first is the end users who are the ID subjects. That is, they are the ones that register their personal details, as well as they are the ones that use these identity systems for authentication and verification services. And likewise, we identify the government, which are the ID providers in this context, because we are looking at the foundational identity systems. And this include like the population registrar, the national ID agencies that register people in the ID systems and issue and manage credentials. Also, we identify the private sectors, and many private companies using government ID systems to identify their customers, such as requiring government IDs to open bank accounts, to register SIM cards, or for credit report rating. And these stakeholders use ID providers, platforms, credentials, and services to authenticate or verify users. Likewise, we identify the civil society, which has the NGOs that serve as an enablers of these ID systems, as well as the international organizations that always provide funding and also ensure building local capabilities. And one thing we realize is a distinctive features of the national digital identity systems is the multi-stakeholders context, where risk impact varies across different stakeholders. That is, any failure of critical systems will affect numerous stakeholders differently. And thus, there is a need to establish risk impact measurement criteria that could align with these different stakeholders' values. So we adopt a multi-stakeholders approach, distinguishing 3 types of impact. The first is impact on the government. The second is impact on the end users, and the third is impact on the relying private organizations. For us to understand what government values when they are implementing these national digital identity systems, we look at existing literatures on public value. And the author, Chris Wells, in 2006 proposed a framework which he called the public return on investment, and which try to evaluate the value of government investment in IT. And these researchers identified 2 sources of public returns, that is the value to the public that result from improving government itself, from the perspective of the citizen, as well as the value, the results they derive from issuing out benefits to persons or group or the public in general. And the framework identifies 6 values based on the different impact that government IT can have on interest of the public stakeholders, which is the financial value, the political value, social value, the ideological value, the stewardship and strategic value. Also, we look at the value measurement methodology framework, which also identify 5 key government values in IT investment. That is the direct value to customers, the social values, and the financial values, the operational values, and the strategic values. By understanding the different values government has in IT investment, we were able to better come up with how to quantify the impacts to this value. And as you could see on the screen, we tried to map the public return on investment value and the value measurement methodologies, and try to have our own impact categories on ways we could better identify a compromise to all these different values. So we have economic impact. We tend to see how a compromise will affect government budget or foreign investment, or maybe fines and other financial impacts. And also we have this reputational damage, how a compromise will affect trust in government or damage public perceptions. And also we have the social impact, which tends to look at the citizen satisfaction environment. And we tend to also come up with a category for the political impact as well, try to see whether a compromise in national identity systems could have an effect on the political process, and also whether this will have effect on the impact of the citizens, and as well as how it's going to affect the operations of this national ID system itself, and also whether there is any physical damage. And rather than directly measuring the impact on some of these values, we tend to use a proxy, as we can see, because sometimes it's quite difficult to measure this value directly as they are intangible. And likewise, to better understand the impact on the end users, we tend to look at literatures on what human values in general. And the same way we did for the government values, we tend to use a proxy to see how we can better quantify this impact. And at the end, we came up with 7 impact categories, which is the economic damage, the reputational damage, the right violations of the end users, the physical damage like the identity theft or loss of lives. And we have the psychological impact, which could be like the distress, inconveniences, and discomfort, and also the social impact, such as how a compromise to national identity systems could disrupt their daily activities. Likewise, we look at the impact on relying private organizations. Private organizations depend on these identity systems for identification purposes. And however, unlike in public organizations, the value attributed to private relying parties differs from the public. And we know the ultimate goals of most private organizations is just based on profit. So we have an impact to try to quantify that impact category, to quantify the economic value or damage a compromise to national digital identity systems could cause on relying parties. And also we have the reputational damage. We could be damage to public perception as well, and also physical damage, and social damage and operational damage as well. And to be able to better quantify this impact, we know many of the existing risk framework makes use of the Likert scales, and which try to explain how these different impact categories should be used to determine the extent of compromise on some of them. And for instance, we have the NIST that tends to have a 5 impact scales. This allows a kind of like standard comparison to be able to aggregate the impact across different category. And in our own case, we have 3 impact scales categories, which is the insignificant, the moderate, and the severe scale. And severe is the highest scores or the worst result, and the insignificant refers to the best result or the lowest scores. And we have an impact scales for the government, in which we try to give like an abstract categorizations for people to be able to understand when best to classify an impact on a certain category. And for instance, if you look at the economics category, when the impact it's very low, we can say this is an insignificant, and we could say, okay, we classify the impact as very low. But if the financial impact is quite high, it could cause a severe economic impact. And we ensure that this is as abstract as possible, so that the scales could be applicable to a lot of different identity systems. And we don't want to give values in this on these scales. So we also create a different scales for the end users as well, to be able to better classify or better compare the different impacts on what the values as well. And also we have a scales for the relying party based on the impact category we have identified.
2 minutes.
Okay, based on the impact categories we have identified. And we have an example use case in which we tend to capture what how this framework could be used. And we have a questions which state like what would be the impact if an identity system went down for like 2 minutes, affecting 2% of the populations due to power failure. And ideally, the government might say we are still within our service level agreement, 99.9%. However, to the citizens, if we try to quantify the impact on citizens differently, citizens might say like 10,000 people are unable to access government services during this period. And this could generate a lot of negative social media. And what we intend to do is we intend to provide a scales that doesn't only focus on the government side of things as the identity providers, but also try to consider all other stakeholders in these ecosystems and better factor in their own impact as well. And just for time's sake, here is a summary of what we have been trying to do. Overall, we have discovered that the existing risk impact assessment do not consider the unique aspect of the national digital identity systems. And also, we tend to adopt a multi-stakeholder approach to better quantify impact in these ecosystems. And we realize that like private sectors, the government as a service provider can also be, the government can consider as a service providers to these customers, which is the resident. And also having a standardized impact risk assessment will help clarify how risks in this domain affect different things we value. And also this could better allow us to compare the impact of risk across different government or different agencies as well. And overall, what we are trying to present is a descriptive framework, not a prescriptive, and we are trying to ensure that this framework could be applicable to many scenarios as much as possible in the identity systems. And the next thing we are trying to look at is we are trying to, this is still a work in progress, and we are hoping to validate this framework through stakeholders engagement to see whether we are missing any stakeholder concern or whether there is any categories we are missing before we finally release our framework. And we also aim to leverage stakeholders engagement to prioritize the risks in this category to better have, to better set priority to these different categories. And that's all.